BYU may be getting its senior signal caller back. Jake Retzlaff issues a countersuit. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show, or Locked On Baylor, your first listen every single day. Cam Stewart is here, and you're going, Cam Stewart, the Baylor guy? Yes. Hosts a national show, The Cam Show, with Rogue Media that has followed the Jake Retzlaff story very closely. We'll also speak to Jake Hatch this week. It's A1. I mean, in Big 12 news, when possibly your number one contender for the conference championship is likely without its quarterback, that is a massive story. And then when it's because of this, allegations of sexual assault, it becomes even bigger. But with the initial lawsuit coming in May, now Jake Retzlaff has countersued, and a lot of this is interesting to see the amount of evidence that Retzlaff's camp has released. From messages that the two shared in January of 2024, post the alleged incident, to even claims that she has been in cahoots with Utah football players or been, in situations with other football players that were not consensual. Retzlaff admitting to having sex with A.G, as she is labeled in the case, but saying it was pleasant. That's the word that's used frequently throughout the case. And that's where we will start. We'll also talk later in the show about some wild Big 12 preseason rankings and then the honor code at BYU and how this plays into this. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. When you figured there'd be a countersuit, you figured that they would try to work quickly with fall approaching, and man, they kind of put all the evidence out on the table.
Yeah, I think that, as someone who's just an amateur court case follower in the summer months, that is pretty quick. A month later to throw in a countersuit with that kind of evidence, that probably doesn't make it great for prosecution in this case. But it is kind of fascinating that you hear when he gets accused, right? And the lawyer comes out and says, "Oh, this is categorically false. None of this ever happened." And You're like, "Of course. You're the guy's lawyer." and that's what you're trying to prove. But to see just a month later, these processes take a long time, man. And for a month later to have that countersuit with evidence ready to go, like that is probably, if you could say that there's a win in this, that's probably a win for Retzlaff and his team.
Yeah, they are countersuing to the tune of roughly $1 million, like $300,000 per three different accusations that they say are unequivocally false. And the direct quote, the response, it says, Mr. Retzlaff and the accuser had a pleasant and entirely consensual evening together, playing video games and a normal evening of consensual sexual interaction that was uneventful but pleasant, with the plaintiff sleeping over and leaving the next morning to return to Salt Lake City. We'll get into later how the honor code plays into this and how Jake Retzlaff may be, by the law of our land, exonerated, but the law of BYU not exactly in the best spot. But as it sits, you hit the nail on the head. Every time your lawyer comes out and says this is untrue and we're going to fight this, but then to display text messages and then to say, hey, here are different things we can point to that say and cite that Retzlaff was not in a situation that was aggressive or involved strangulation, and really egregious accusations that came out on the front end. There's still plenty that hasn't. I mean, the tough part about this, we don't know what the original case entailed in full, what evidence will be laid out in full. We only get that response publicly from Retzlaff and his attorneys. So obviously that's going to skew it a little bit. And look, just because there are flirty texts in January of 2024 doesn't completely nullify the accusations that happened from 2023. But I also think you're right to say, if you're looking at this as a reporter, as a journalist, as a BYU fan, as anybody that's associated with the college football realm, this looks good, a whole lot better than it did a month ago for Jake Retzlaff.
Yeah. And I think, obviously we'll get to this part of it later in the show, but like at any other school, if they see this evidence in an internal investigation, they could put him on the field while this plays out. That's the kind of boost we're talking about here, enough that could get him playing on the field at most schools in college football. It's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out over the next 2 months here before BYU starts playing games. Obviously, Retzlaff's team will try to expedite this as much as possible so we can possibly play this season. It seems kind of crazy that this came out in May and there's an opportunity for him to play this season. And we know we've talked about this in the past, like BYU is going to let this play out. They're not going to just be like, you know what, that does look kind of good. Like, let's throw them out there. Not going to name other programs, but I'm sure there are other programs that would do something like the latter and just be like, you know what, fine. These texts from his side look fine. Go ahead. I will say on a lighter note in this story, I think, we obviously are trying to find the facts 100%. And I think one thing that will be proven incorrect in a court of law, if need be, is that Jake Retzlaff is an NFL prospect. And that's why this is coming out, because he's an NFL prospect.
Yeah, you say lighter note. I mean, I'll take it to what I think is kind of the heaviest note of the countersuit. It says, this is from KSL. Among a list of other defenses in the response, Retzlaff alleged the accuser had sex with one or more Utah football players. So I know I mentioned that off the top, but he continues. Then reported to Provo police 4 or 5 days later that she was assaulted by a childhood friend from Salt Lake City. Retzlaff claiming that they were not childhood friends. That can be proven. And then from there, saying the response filing claimed the lawsuit against Retzlaff indicated an attempt to extort money from him, and that whichever Utah football player was a childhood friend of hers, who she did identify to police as her assailant, must either be a bench warmer or, even if a starter for Utah, is not a viable target for payment and is not an NFL draft prospect. That is the craziest wrinkle that you could possibly throw. I didn't do it. Someone else did, and they play for the rival football team across town, and these two people just want my money.
And it's totally nuts. We've seen, I don't know if this exact situation of, hey, it was somebody else that did it, but I'm going to say it's this guy who I also had a relationship with. But the unfortunate part of that is we have seen that from athletes. We've seen athletes get extorted like that and have these false claims thrown at them. In terms of what we learned in a court of law, we saw that at Baylor with a projected first round pick in Sean Oakman. Again, I wasn't there that night, but that case, he was proven not guilty in a court of law, and he missed out on an NFL career mainly because of that. So it has been something that we've seen. It's sickening. It's horrifying. All of these things all the claims thrown out in here are, but unfortunately it's something we have seen before, seen it make national news before. That would be really a just wild wrinkle to throw into this case.
Yeah. Let's then go back to the lighthearted. I wanted to just to sandwich it here. There's Big 12 standings that JD Piquel released this week that I'd love to break down. And then we'll come back to the honor code and really that big intricacy in this whole deal. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I go to FanDuel, and I think the best part for me is how just nice the app looks. I say best part, but it's the convenience of opening the FanDuel app during a Major League Baseball game and then saying, you know what, I think that Kumar Rocker and my Texas Rangers are going to win this game, even though they're down 2-0 to the White Sox in the first. And I can put a live bet on the Rangers and Bruce Bochy's squad. I've been using FanDuel a lot, and it keeps track of daily promotions, and those are really fun ways to bet as well. Make your own same-game parlay. They make it super easy. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel. Old friend JD Piquel, former host of the hit Waco multimedia show Up Tempo, released his Big 12 tiers this week and put Arizona and UCF at the bottom. That makes sense. That's his.
Can we give the names of the tiers? I kind of like what JD did with this.
Yeah. So tier number 1 says, I can explain it. This is him justifying the top 4 teams he puts in the Big 12. I'll bury the lead a bit and give you those 4 in a second. Then tier 2, I've got a feeling. He thinks,
The Black Eyed Peas tier.
There's a chance here. Tier 3 says a tier of their own. There's only one school featured there. Yeah. The next 3, the final 3, movie death, not really dead. He says, not really dead, just,
Glenn, Walking Dead.
Yeah. The actor's alive, then there is would be just like the Big 12 as the second to last column, which in essence to me means it'd be crazy if these teams won, but it's also pretty Big 12 of them to do so. Followed by this just feels bad for Arizona and UCF. I already gave you that one, which is legit. He starts with the top 4 that he can explain winning a Big 12 title. He omits Texas Tech. He omits Kansas State, 2 popular picks for the Big 12 championship. He includes Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, and you're fighting Baylor Bears.
JD Pickell's Baylor Bears. I would probably rather have Kansas State in there than BYU, mainly because of the situation we talked about in the first segment with Jake Retzlaff. I know BYU fans, he's not the whole team, I know, but I would just have a better feeling than JD, of course, of having Kansas State with that well-rounded team and their quarterback in there, who I'm still giving some belief to. I'm not giving the hype I was last year. I'd probably have Kansas State above there, and with the Tech thing, I kind of want to believe in Tech. I just need to see it.
If there was ever a year to believe in Tech, it feels like it has to be this one. It really has to be this one.
They've kind of hooked me the last couple of years. I've said this on the show before, not quite as this is Tech's year to win the Big 12, but I can see a way where Tech is in Arlington for the Big 12 championship game, that kind of thought. And I know they got way more talented. They're one of those teams that is just a B word to rank, man. You just don't know where to put them. And with how good the quarterbacks are in this conference, I see a guy in Tech who's just a middle of the road, good enough, get the car in the garage, kind of like a Jake Retzlaff kind of quarterback. And it's tough for me when we put so much importance on that position. It's tough for me to pick them over an Arizona State or a Baylor, or even an Iowa State. So, I think Tech, there is a world where Tech wins 10 games. They hate doing that. They never do that. But there is a way, a road for them to win 10 games this year with that talent on the roster and somewhat easy schedule by Big 12 standards. Pretty easy schedule.
I don't mind the way that theirs stacks up. Shehan Jayaraja just wrote a massive piece about Texas Tech, spent time in Lubbock. Really, really wanted you to read it too. Really made sure that was emphasized.
Yeah.
And at the heart of how I explain Texas Tech, it's just their best season, 8-4. Their worst season, 8-4. We got a good squad this year.
Way to put
That's probably 8-4. It's gonna be a tough one this year. 7-5.
and it's what Baylor and TCU used to be, right? Before Gary Patterson, that's what you would have said about TCU. They've got a great squad. Maybe they can eke out 9-3. That's once every 5 or 10 years you have a year like that. Or Baylor before Art Briles. Obviously they had some good Grant Taft teams in the early 80s, but for a long time it was 8-4. That's a hell of a year for Baylor. And then they kind of take that next step. I don't know. Iowa State, same thing. They didn't win 10 games before last year, right? Even their best teams with a Super Bowl quarterback on the team leading it wouldn't get to 10 wins. That's the same thing we're dealing with Tech here.
Let's pause what you just said. Best tight end in college football.
Yep.
The number 1 fantasy running back in the NFL.
But
the Super Bowl quarterback, Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
And they went to 6-6. It wasn't even failed to win 10 games. They went 6-6.
Yeah. That was interesting.
What a damn good head coach, too.
Yes. A team like that in the Big 12. Again, we're not talking about a young, super talented SEC West team that they get still slaughtered by Alabama and LSU and Like, it sounds like I'm describing A&M here. But like, there's no reason that those teams, I would give 2 years of those teams at Iowa State didn't go 10-2. Like, no real excuse for that.
Which they almost did. The year prior was like, oh, this is a really good Iowa State team, and they're bringing everyone back. And then they just decided to be bad.
Yeah, there was that one. It was that year, and I don't remember which one it was that they did that. Was it 21? And they were top 15, maybe even top 10 going into the season. They lost to Iowa week 2, and then lost to Baylor in the first conference game. They were still ranked, and it just kind of fell apart after that.
That's what it was. The year prior, they went to the Big 12 championship and played Oklahoma.
Yes, and Matt Campbell was furious. If you can believe that.
Then after, because his linebacker, was it Will McDonald?
It might have been.
Dear God, what a loaded Iowa State team was, I think, thrown out pretty immediately, and then Oklahoma goes on to win, and you're like, okay, it's fine, Iowa State, you're bringing everybody back, and hello, 6-6. That encapsulates, now that you mention it, a good portion of Big 12 teams that have kind of felt in that realm. I think Oklahoma State's exonerated from that. They have been consistently in that 9-10 win range over the course of Gundy's career. You could exonerate some of those good, solid early Big 12 West Virginia teams that were great. I mean, there's been consistency for 3-4 years out of some Big 12 schools, and I don't know if we're seing that yet, and maybe that's why Pikel's list looks the way it does, because we didn't expect Arizona State, and Baylor was 3-9 a couple of years ago, and a UCF miracle away from 2-10. Iowa State lost some major NFL production, and he still has them in that top category. In that second category,
that's a big question for them.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd put them top 4.
I like their defense enough that I still have them kind of in this tier. But like, going back to the Tech thing, like if we see by week 4 or 5 that this Tech thing is kind of working out, which I know is kind of getting ahead of the skis when it comes to this team, I would maybe rethink how I would look at Tech versus Iowa State.
Yeah, it could work out. Tech could start 6-0 and then finish 8-4. Which would be a very Texas Tech thing to do.
Yep.
And that second tier is TCU, Texas Tech, Kansas State. The closer we get to the football season, the more I'm kind of liking TCU. 2 NFL caliber wide receivers and a really good quarterback in Josh Hoover. TCU's dangerous.
Yeah, I feel like I've kind of been pumping up the hype train a little bit for TCU of like, we're not looking long and hard enough at this team, but there's still a lot of question marks on that defense specifically. They've got to get a run game back. Their run game was horrible last year. It was non-existent. They couldn't stop the run either. Those are 2 things you need to have even in this quarterback-heavy Big 12 conference. I like Hoover a lot. I like the weapons he's got to throw to. There's still a lot of questions for me to think that they could compete for the conference title this year.
Yeah, the rest of this I kind of struggle to argue with. He says Colorado's in a tier of their own, kind of that 8 spot with the Big 12.
It's a good way to put it, because I don't know what they are. He's not saying good or bad. It's like, I don't know.
They were chomping at 10 wins last season, and they could certainly do that again. Deion Sanders proves he could win, and they also lost a Heisman Trophy winner and a 4th round quarterback or 5th round
retired number quarterback.
And past that, the movie death features Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State. I think he's a little low on Kansas. Utah and Oklahoma State. I also think Utah's due for a bounce back.
Probably. I do want to talk about Oklahoma State for 1 second. Yeah, like, if we're talking movie death, not really dead, this is Indiana Jones with that really annoying woman in Short Round, and they jump out of the plane on a raft into a river on the side of a mountain and just survive. That's Oklahoma State's not really dead. I don't see much from this team that I'm like, oh yeah, they're much better than last year. I'm not seeing it yet. I know they actually had a decent transfer portal too, not Tech, and not nearly at like the top of the conference, but they were decent at that. I don't see much life in Oklahoma State. Of course, with Utah, there is absolutely that chance at new life. I'm not a huge Devin Dampier guy. This is one of the few teams I look at in this conference that I say everything else around the quarterback could get them to a level that they weren't at last year. That's where I see Utah. Again, I saw the Zaquan Finn thing at Baylor last year. Devin Dampier comes in, a very similar player, not quite as good as Zaquan Finn. That guy doesn't get you to a Big 12 championship in year one. Just doesn't. And Kansas is Kansas. I don't know. Lost their OC, who was really good for them last year.
I hate the whole law of averages thing. Because it's, I say Cam, Utah went 9-3. Yeah. Cam, Kansas went 9-3. Yeah. Oklahoma State went 9-3. I'm not stunned by any of those things. Houston went 9-3. I'm going, you know what? I can see it somewhere in there.
Houston's the biggest wild card team in this conference.
There's just they could be the Arizona State. Oh, did I just cook?
Chat.
Did I just cook?
The DCT cook right there.
Ooh, they could be the Arizona State.
If Wegman is what they say he is. And again, we saw him at A&M. There's almost like an A&M tax, right? Where that team, that program is just so brain dead and can't get out of their own way that you need to grade them on the scale of how they played at A&M. That Houston defense was legit last year. They were an average quarterback away from being 8-4. Like, I truly believe that. And maybe they would have beat TCU by 4 touchdowns instead of 2. But if Connor Wegman is this guy, even as like a above average, pretty good Big 12 quarterback, they can really surprise some teams. Houston is my kind of like dark horse, make some noise, watch out for this team this year.
I know we've gone kind of long here, but I'm continuing to remind myself how crazy the Big 12 is. Is it wild to say Willie Fritz might be, and this will come to fruition in 2 years, might be a top 3 head coach in the Big 12? Like he's been one of the best in college football, just under the radar, sneaky national champion at Sam Houston State, goes to Tulane and takes a program that was terrible, genuinely terrible,
awful, and
takes them to a Cotton Bowl win against Lincoln Riley's USC team. That's a good football coach.
He's super impressive, man. Like, if you want to play this down the road, like 2-3 years, that and say that Houston wins a Big 12 championship and is in a New Year's Six Bowl, for me, that puts Willie Fritz ahead of a lot of coaches in this conference, right? It could well put him ahead of Dave Aranda, depending on what happens in this next year or two.
He has as many New Year's Six, whatever they call them.
And he would have done it with 2 teams in this scenario. He would have done it with 2 teams in 2 different conferences. So to me, that could be better than what Dave Aranda has done. That could be better than what, obviously, what Joey McGuire has done. Kalani Sitake, that would get you into the playoff if you win this conference, right? So it could be better than what Kenny Dillingham has done to this point. This is playing a pretty big hypothetical game, but yeah, it could be better than what Sonny Dykes has done. I know he won a playoff game and then lost the other one on a nail biter, but it would be just as impressive as what a lot of these guys have done. If that's what he's able to do in the next 2-3 years, win a conference championship, go to a college football playoff, I guess not a New Year's Six Bowl anymore. That would put him in the highest echelon, I think. Yeah.
That was the longest segment in Locked On Big 12 history.
Better than Gundy.
I still didn't tell you that West Virginia, Houston, Cincinnati would be just like the Big 12 to be competitive. Coming up, honor code. So the new biggest intricacy to the Jake Retzlaff situation to me is the BYU honor code and his admission of having premarital sex with A.G. as she's listed in this case. And again, we haven't decided anything, whether he's exonerated or found liable, whether he has to pay or she has to pay, or what this looks like. What we don't even the whole Utah football player being involved thing and her assailant playing on the team at Utah but not being a moneymaker, and there are wild pieces to this. But if we focus simply on Jake Retzlaff saying, "Hey, hand up, I had," in the words that he put it, pleasant sexual contact with this person, bang, like you immediately have violated the honor code, and
you've already dug the grave. Yeah,
like you. Not only have you violated the honor code, and we saw this with Jimmer Fredette in that entire season, that March Madness run, I should say. Jimmer didn't do anything.
Right.
Clarify here. But with the Fredette team, now you have a very high profile player, the starting quarterback of a team that's projected by many to win the Big 12 or compete or possibly be a college football playoff caliber team. So a part of this goes to, man, this is a figurehead that kids look up to. And he was lauded as the first Jewish quarterback in BYU history. That was a big piece for the university. He got to become a figurehead, not just as the starting quarterback, but also as this kind of bridge builder amongst religious beliefs at the university, and a new era of BYU where they say, hey, we are so proud to have a Jewish quarterback. And I know that changed the perception a lot of people had of BYU and their thoughts toward other faiths. Most of those being misconceptions. And now, like the guy that you just threw out there as your All-American, look at us, we love this guy, and he speaks for us, says, hey, I broke the honor code. I had premarital sex while on the football team, and it was, a pleasant interaction. I didn't do any, like, this is just what punishment matches the honor code crime of this.
Yeah, it is fascinating from that aspect of, like, it's weird to say now, but he is kind of a trailblazer for BYU, right?
Sure,
like that was a guy, as you said, that is in front of the entire country in these games. They've got the BYU shirts, like it's a big deal. And here's someone who's saying, by just being there, you don't have to be LDS to go to BYU.
100%.
You don't have to be LDS to enjoy your time at BYU.
Which one I'd say that's the misconception. Most people are like, oh, if you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, then BYU hates you, or they disagree with you, or they think you're going to hell, which is completely wrong. And this is Jake Retzlaff proving that the BYU can coexist with and accept and embrace the whole BYU thing. And then that guy they used is saying this,
Yeah, because now you play it out like, let's say Jake Retzlaff is the NFL draft prospect and he goes on to play in the pros. That changes a lot of these kids being recruited who are not LDS, who are getting recruited to BYU. And they're saying, well, you know what? Retzlaff went there. He's in the NFL now. Like, why can't I go there? And it would be pretty catastrophic to see his dismissal for either one of these. Like, if he's found guilty, obviously that is hugely problematic and catastrophic. But even if it is just a consensual sex act that gets him kicked out because that's BYU's honor code, that's probably, their honor code is probably more important than their football recruiting. But that does change things of athletes being like, man, like, I thought we could do something great. Like BYU, look at all these crowds, DeBonsa goes there, Retzlaff at football. But like, if I want to have sex like a college student, I'm going to get kicked out, like no ifs, ands, or buts. And I think that's where it does become BYU, standing for something more than just being a good athletics program and being different from other schools. Just by admitting that, I think that's your sentence right there. Like in terms of football, right? They had a running back 8 or 10 years ago who missed the whole season because he was caught with a girl in his room. Like this is a different ball game, man. We're not the court of law stuff is separate from what we're talking about here.
I think there are already BYU fans that are considering this new era of BYU athletics being different. Now they're spending a ton of money. Now they're carrying, this is the front porch of your university. It is going to help carry your faith. I think it's very admirable what BYU is doing and spending the money they're spending. But there has to be BYU fans who think, man, we're moving so fast. We're losing you've heard a couple of donors or, members of the church saying we'll never be the highest bidder because BYU is, we do things differently here. Now, Brian Santiago, the new athletic director, I got this dropped in your lap, has to decide. We have already told you we're not as focused on the 2-star from Logan. We're focused on the 5-star from LA. Mm-hmm. We've already told you that. Now that's the new era of BYU athletics, does that mean that as your athletic department grows and becomes more diverse and differentiates, that your honor code bends or is looser for athletes? That's what BYU has to decide. That's what their new athletic director has to decide. What is the precedent in 2025 for a BYU athlete that has sex?
And this is kind of feels weird and a little morbid to say, but if he is found not guilty of doing this, that almost makes this story more intriguing, right? Like this becomes, it's probably the biggest story in college football anyway, but it becomes like a cultural story of, well, this kid didn't do this awful act, allegedly, but he did have sex, something that almost all college students do in this country, and he's going to be kicked off the football team and thrown out of school probably because of that. It becomes just this fascinating thing where Brian Santiago could be making an example here. That's what it becomes. Like, no matter what comes out of the court case, what example are you going to make at BYU? And from what I've seen in some of these stories and some of these comment sections, it divides BYU fans a little bit. I think most are sticking with, hey, we are a different school. We do have this higher standard that we need to keep, and we're going to keep keeping that. But to the other hand of what we just talked about, like BYU athletics is doing, as well as it's done in a long time, and on a national stage. They're now in a major conference. They have every opportunity to be playing in the biggest college football games and college basketball games in America because of the investment that they've put in and guys wanting to come there. That becomes a huge deal if you say, yeah, right or wrong. It becomes a huge deal if you say we've still got to hold up the honor code no matter what.
Yeah. You mentioned, at every university in America, that's what college kids kind of do. And BYU prides itself on being different. I understand why so many BYU fans have said, look, if he's admitting to having sex, kick him out. He's done. Set the tone. Because a lot of these people, look, just because you're a member of the LDS faith doesn't mean you don't want to hook up when you're in college. It probably means it's getting the pressure, the temptation is there even more because the expectation is set. And when a rule is set, you want to break it. And so by and large, this fan base is looking at Jake Retzlaff going, hey, we all did this. Like we all stuck to our guns. We stuck to our faith. We stuck to our religion, our beliefs. We stuck to what BYU stands for to uphold a standard that is unique and honestly unheard of across the rest of the country.
And to go off that, there are plenty of, students who are saying that. I'll bet there are people in that locker room saying that. There are teammates saying that. I know these guys are rock stars being on a football team. That's just what it is in America, right? But I'm sure most of them have upheld that because they want to stay on the team. They want to stay in school. And so there are some probably team leaders that are saying, well, why? If he would get reinstated or whatever, be like, well, why does he get to break the rules? Because he's the quarterback. It's a harsh lesson in life, right? But yeah, not just the students that are doing it. I'm sure there are people in that locker room and his teammates that look up to him, saying, I want to do that too, man. Yeah, I didn't do it. Yeah, the consensual is what they want to do. Sorry, you should clarify that.
Sure. The reports have also stated that Retzlaff has been a part of player-led practices, and man, I don't know. If you put it up to his teammates or you put it up to, and we have a whole case to figure out between now and then, but the complexities grow. That's Cameron Stewart of Locked On Baylor and the Cam Show, hosting national news every single day, talking a lot of hockey, a lot of Jake Retzlaff. A
lot of hockey, baby.
This has been, and always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Doe A.G.